Hi there, it's Justin here. Thanks for running with me. I am on the edge of the city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, on what's called the Mountain Lake Greenway. This is one of the runs I like to do that's not too awfully far from my house. So I'm not on the road right now. It is August 2022, and I'm just using a run here in the middle of the day to, kind of like I always do, to process my thinking, try to sharpen some ideas. I just saw something interesting on the trail here. Looks like we've got a baby snake that maybe got, oh no, it's still alive. I don't know if you can see it there in the camera. He needs to get off the trail though. Go on little guy. You can get run over by a cyclist here. Yeah, it's better. Nice day to sun. I understand the temptation. Okay, good deed for the day. Looked like it was probably just a baby brown snake. Okay, and now I've gone off the greenway and I am entering Haw Ridge Park, which is really just a space for trail running, light hiking, and mountain biking. I like it when because there are no motorized vehicles allowed in here. And I don't even really want you bringing your dogs in here, because it's kind of a little bit of a nature preserve too. There are deer in here, among other things. Okay. It's a little muddy today. I have not been in here on the trails for a while, because I find that if I'm, whoops, wrong turn. I find that if I'm not in good enough shape, this is a great place to have an injury. As you can see, the footing is a little irregular. Here we go. So when I'm getting back from an injury or not in the shape I want to be, I stay off the trails, look for more even footing until the muscles are in reasonable shape and I can go a little bit faster. Because one of the secrets to not hurting yourself on uneven footing is getting your foot up quickly, not putting too much weight, especially on the heel, back of the foot. But that's hard to do when you're out of shape. Get off the foot fast. So this morning, I just finished a book I've been reading. A book by William Todd Schultz. Fascinating book called The Mind of the Artist. Oxford University Press, 2022. Came out this year. And Schultz, the author, seems to be a personality psychologist who clearly also has some expertise related to clinical psychology, psychiatry. It is a fascinating read as a book if you're interested in artists, what makes them tick, what motivates them. And since I'm married to an artist and I have a daughter who's a creative, I thought maybe I should see what a real professional thinks about these things. But that was actually only a secondary motivation. As you may know, if you've joined me on other runs, lately I've been doing a fair amount of reading in and around the arts, the various scientific studies of the arts, and was part of facilitating a workshop in Edinburgh, Scotland on what's called aesthetic cognitivism. I'll explain. Applied to especially how the arts might bring about new spiritual or theological insights. In short, aesthetic cognitivism is the theory that one of the reasons we value the arts is that they give us new ideas, new insights, new hypotheses, new intellectual questions, new perspectives, help us make connections that we didn't see before, and otherwise give us what you might think of as conceptual or cognitive deliverances. So, the claim is we don't just value arts because it's pretty or makes us feel good or evokes certain emotional states that we find pleasurable, but the arts can actually help us think differently, maybe even better, help bring about new understandings. And so the Art Seeking Understanding Project has been concerned with trying to conceptually get a handle on these claims and then empirically, scientifically, start testing them out. Is it really true that the arts might lead to conceptual or intellectual insights, new understandings, especially of a theological or spiritual kind, that are then valuable? Because if it's true, then maybe doing the arts, viewing the arts, participating in the arts in various ways, let's go this way, might actually be an extra boost to making new theological discoveries or progress on theological questions and problems, lead to new spiritual information. That's the hope, but let's not just hope, let's find out. So because of my work in this area, as mostly a facilitator and advisor, consultant, I've been trying to do some background reading, and it is fascinating. And so William Todd Schultz's book, The Mind of the Artist, part of my reading, and I did find it a really interesting read. So what Schultz does in the book is take on a few psychological claims that are often made about artists, and it tries to evaluate, well, what's the evidence? And then offers his, as well as offering his own view on the matter of what seems to set apart artists psychologically. So he takes on such common notions as artists are tortured souls who are psychologically, well, pathological. They suffer from psychopathology of various sorts. He argues that actually the evidence for that claim is not strong at all, far from conclusive, and in fact, not even terribly suggestive, with some possible exceptions if you narrow down the scope of what you mean by art into very specific domains and populations. Like, for instance, female American poets of the mid to late 20th century. Okay, then maybe you see a slightly higher incidence of some forms of psychopathology than in the general population. But overall, the impression from his review is the evidence is not very strong that there's much of a link to being an artist or even an accomplished artist and mental illness. He also looks at, well, what about suicide? Don't artists have a higher rate of suicide? And there he seems to suggest, well, there's a little bit of evidence suggesting that there may be higher incidence of suicide among especially musical and performing artists compared to similar comparison populations of non-artists, but it's not nearly as pervasive or as compelling as one might think. So in sum, he wants to say, look, art is not driven by madness, or to put it another way, I'm going to go back out onto the flat here. Being an artist doesn't require one to be insane or suicidal, and being an artist does not lead one in a compelling way toward madness or suicide. Hi there. Hi there. What is it then about? Is there anything that we can say about artists? And there Schultz wants to make a more positive claim. He thinks there is a sort of artist profile that, while it doesn't capture all artists and there's plenty of variability, that there is one personality trait that is conspicuously present in artists across various art domains. So you see it in painters of a certain level of notoriety, musicians, poets, fiction writers, theatrical performers, filmmakers, and so on. That particular personality profile, he argues and provides compelling evidence, is scientifically investigated and on reasonably firm ground. So what is it about, what is the sort of artist profile psychologically? He makes a pretty strong case that it is being high in one personality dimension, and secondarily, relatively low in another. I'm going to leave you hanging for just a second before I spring the punchline to give a little bit of background on personality dimensions. I mentioned that Schultz is a personality psychologist. He knows his stuff when it comes to personality traits. what are sometimes called adaptations and goals, motivations. So let me sidebar for just a second. Lots of us think we know what a psychological trait is. And we think, oh well, that's the stuff that the Enneagram measures, or Strength Finders, or Myers-Briggs. And that's not quite right. When psychologists mean someone has a personality trait, they mean a relatively stable bundle of ways of processing information, ways of thinking, motivations that then make certain kind of behaviors, certain types of attitudes, certain types of values more likely than others. Traits are meant to be stable once they're sort of settled into place. And that's an important caveat. The traits that most psychological scientists hang their hat on don't entirely stabilize for most people until about their mid-20s. You got some signs earlier, sure, but they can still be changing a lot in late adolescence and what's sometimes called emerging adulthood. Okay? But once they're in place, they're relatively stable across context and across development. Those are traits. These traits, but the traits are not the only thing that personality, what makes us and distinguishes us. Traits do make certain kinds of, sometimes they're called the characteristic adaptations or strategies, thought and behavior patterns, more or less likely. And these are how we tend to cope with certain kinds of situations, certain kind of environmental situations that may or may not arise. So, to take one famous personality trait type, extroversion, somebody who's high in extroversion is somebody who, in part, is generally pretty happy to be around other people. Going out and spending time with others energizes. They seek out that social interaction. And people high in extroversion tend to have lots of positive emotional experiences. They tend to be happy, cheerful, effervescent type of people. Okay? More than the general population. That's a trait. Their kind of mid-grade personality might be something like, so someone high in extroversion is more likely to say yes to party invitations. Is more likely to stay longer at parties, not get tired and go home. That is, they've got a strategy for kind of actualizing that personality trait. I'm going slightly fast and loose here for the sake of time. But that's another slice of personality. Another slice still are what we might call thrivings or strivings. Strivings is a term that Robert Emmons, UC Davis has really developed, he and his collaborators. Strivings ideas, these are what are the stories, short, focused little stories about how I tell what I say about myself in terms of my motivations, who I want to be, who I try to be. The day-to-day basis, I try to be X, a good parent, a good father. I try to please God. I try to be a model employee. I try to, get as many new experiences as I can. Those I try to kind of statements index that strivings level. And then on top of all of that, we have these big grand narratives about who we are. Okay, so those are kind of layers of personality that we might talk about. Personality psychologists, of course, have their in-house disagreements about which are most important, which are most variable, whether we can collapse some into others, and so on. But they're helpful for thinking about who we are as distinctive individuals. So, back to artists. And back to traits. Schultz wants to say artists tend to be high in one trait and less consistently, but consistently enough to be noted, tend to be low on another. And these traits that he's concerned with are two of what are called the big five of personality. Sometimes this is called the ocean model, O-C-E-A-N, because that's a nice little acronym for the depth of your personality. 5 traits. O stands for openness, C, conscientiousness, E, extroversion, A, agreeableness, and N, traditionally called neuroticism. In this context, it doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means you're higher in negative emotions and emotional instability, especially on the negative end of the spectrum. Okay? It is associated with certain kinds of mood disorders, but it's not the same. You can be high in neuroticism and well-adjusted psychologically. Working backwards then from N, the A was agreeableness. And this captures things like how much you try to get along with others, avoid conflict, how selfless, helping you are, versus maybe more focused on yourself. People high in agreeableness are often helpers. They get energy from helping others. Low on agreeableness can seem a little self-centered. Can be more contrarian in a negative sense. Socially. Okay? E, extroversion. That one's most commonly known. And it is similar to what we all usually think. An extrovert, socially outgoing. The non-extrovert or introvert is more socially withdrawn. They value their own company. They get exhausted by too much social interaction, oftentimes. But the extrovert is also not just sort of socially outgoing, but often has more positive emotional states, is more happy, joyful, excited in a positive way than somebody low in extroversion. Okay? That's 3, neuroticism, agreeableness, extroversion. Then there are these last 2, the O and the C. C stands for conscientiousness. And a person high in conscientiousness tries to do what's expected of them. They're great attention to detail, careful, meticulous, responsible. Try to be very honest, though that one bleeds into agreeableness as well. Low in conscientiousness, just the opposite. The rules are not all that important to me. It doesn't matter if you fudge a little bit here and there. Other things are more important. And O stands for openness. Openness with 2 big subdivisions. One, openness to ideas, new thoughts, new perspectives, and open to new experiences, sensations, I don't know, events, activities, practices, behaviors. Super high openness is willing to try lots of different things. A very low openness person might think, well, what I've got is good enough. No, why should I eat at a different restaurant? This one's perfectly good. No thanks, I've already got a handle on the most important parts of truth about the world, so I don't need to try on new ideas. So O, openness, C, conscientiousness, E, extroversion, A, agreeableness, N, neuroticism. Schultz then argues, supported by some pretty decent evidence of a scientific sort, that artists tend to be unusually high in openness. That's their big set-apart trait. And secondarily, often are relatively low in conscientiousness. Okay? Willing to try on new ideas, new experiences, new sensations, new perspectives. Not too worried about the rules, getting things done on time, meeting other people's expectations, especially in an employment and other kinds of authorities, cultural or otherwise. Okay? And you can probably see that fits a general stereotype that many of us have of artistic sorts. But let me do the obnoxious thing that then scientists tend to do, is qualify the claim. To do that, I think I'm going to walk for a little bit so that I've got enough breath. Okay. So the claim is artists, if anything characterizes them as a group, it's high openness, low conscientiousness. But I want to add that as compelling as Schultz's analysis is, and as reasonably solid as the science he turns to for support is, he has restricted in kind of an unspoken way what he means by artists. It's pretty clear if you read the book and you're looking for it, as you can see, by an artist he means really these sort of paradigm changers. Those people who work in these domains that we call the arts, who bring about some novelty, change. They're pioneers of a certain sort. So they're not the artists of old, who many contemporary theorists might call artisans pejoratively, who were really good at saying, oh, you need this cathedral design in such and such a way. I'm on it. I'm going to make amazing stained glass that you're going to find beautiful and in keeping with all of the expectations. Or I'm going to create this religious icon in the prescribed form that is used in the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church or within certain branches of Hinduism, where certain rules are followed, and a true artist knows how to follow those with a high deal of precision and maybe with a little bit of their personal touch, but they're not going to revolutionize that domain. Okay, but especially maybe since the 19th century and certainly into the 20th century in the world that we often call arts, there's been this almost fetishizing of revolutionaries. Those who change whatever genre they started with or change the status quo through art. Revolutionaries. And that's who Schultz is primarily focused on here, if you look carefully. So And it shows in some of his case studies, which are wonderful, by the way. It's really, and the book is very much enriched by many of these case studies. But without recognizing that these case studies are selected for a particular reason, and Schultz is pretty good at acknowledging that, they can be a little misleading. So John Lennon gets a fair amount of play because he certainly was a musical innovator. But there is a sort of, hi there, a side comment made about how John Lennon's artistry, becoming an artist, doesn't seem to be triggered until after She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand and Please Please Me. The early stuff that rocked the charts and made the Beatles a household name. That's not the art that Schultz is particularly interested in. Okay? I'm gonna go off trail again, because that was fun. Schultz isn't gonna say anything about, I don't know, sorry, catching my breath. He's not saying anything about Dennis Kincaid, the commercially most successful artist perhaps ever in his lifetime. He's more interested in Jackson Pollock, in Dali, in Van Gogh. And I raise this not as a criticism, but as an important acknowledgement that when you're looking for correlations and especially causations, how you circumscribe the problem space matters. Because it's easy to walk away from Schultz's book thinking, he's characterized anybody who paints, or anybody who photographs, or anybody who writes poetry, and so on. But no, that's not his project. It's those who do those sorts of things in a way that's paradigm breaking, pioneering, revolutionary, unsettling to the status quo. And that's an element of the arts much more valued in Western art of the last 2 centuries than it is of art in other cultures, most other cultures, and throughout time. So we just need to put that out there. But what is it about these, especially 20th century revolutionaries in the art domain? Schultz convincingly argues that they tend to be high on openness and low on conscientiousness. Relatively low in conscientiousness. One of the comparisons that Schultz provides that I found especially interesting because of my work and the work of Blueprint 1543 in trying to understand scientists and especially encourage scientists to work on topics that are inspired by theology or could inspire theology, is he compares scientists to artists in terms of what are their differences in characteristic personality profiles. Caution, I have not read the primary research here. I am reporting what he reports, his synopsis, but it has the ring of authenticity to me from my experience being and working with scientists. And he says, no, openness is not the big driver trait of the scientist. Conscientiousness is. Good, grinded out lab technician, follow the breadcrumbs, make scientific progress in physics, engineering, chemistry, biology, experimental psychology, geology, these kinds of folks often are high in conscientiousness. They want to do the thing right. They want to check their work. They want strong evidence before making claims. And indeed, it is for that reason that culturally we've started to put our trust in scientists. Because on average, they really tend to be high in conscientiousness. They're careful. So if their tools are good, outcomes are going to be pretty good given the limitations of those tools. Okay? And in contrast to the artist, the scientist is not typically high in openness. Tend to be just like everybody else when it comes to openness. Okay? Scientists also, he notes, tend to be a little lower than typical in extroversion. Not massively way outside of the norms, but enough. And for those of us who know what it's like to do science, you understand. You got to get away from the people and put your head down and do the work. Okay, so where's the artist? Sort of prototype his high openness, low conscientiousness. In that order of priority. The scientist is high conscientiousness, relatively low extroversion. In that order. Scientists in general like to know what they know and know what they don't. They like to know where they made mistakes. They like to know when to fix, how to fix them. They like to know their process and procedures. They like to know other people's process and procedures. They like incremental progress that can be counted on. And so of the kind of artists that Schultz is profiling. For them, often, they don't have a very good sense of how they do what they do, why it works, or if it works at all. They do what they do. There's a liberation, a freedom there. Importantly, they're not really bound to, is it true? Is it good? Those aren't motivators, at least not primary motivators, for the prototypical artist that Schultz is concerned with. Interestingly, Schultz, though, adds another wrinkle when it comes to scientists. He says, look, the vast majority of scientists fit this kind of high conscientiousness, ordinary openness, ordinary agreeableness, ordinary or low neuroticism, and relatively low extroversion profile. But there are a handful of science types who are high in openness as well as high in conscientiousness, and maybe a little higher in extroversion than the general public, even if not especially so. And these are the scientific pioneers. The Darwins, the Einsteins, I don't know, Bacons, the Hawkings, the Goulds, these kind of people who have high conscientiousness to do the hard work, to check their work, and so forth. They've got enough openness that they're going to intellectually play too. They're going to be driven for new perspectives and connections. And go ahead and entertain those. And again, that sort of rings true to me in my experience. These are, you know, a minority of those scientists who are working at the national labs around the world, at the major tech schools, problem-solving places, factories, engineering groups. They're there. They tend to be a small percentage of the general folks. Maybe they're, in my speculation, a little higher in research universities of a broad sort. Again, I'm not talking about tech schools, but maybe it's true of the MITs and Caltechs of this world. But there's still probably the minority of people there who are scientists. Okay? What I find a little bit fascinating from my own personal experiences working in the scientific study of religion area and having been at one of these prestigious research universities is this is not too far off of a profile of letter writers that I often used to get more than I do now, who sometimes are labeled cranks. So these are people who write in to say, that stuff you're working on, I solved 30 years ago, but no one would listen to me. Hey, you seem like an open-minded person. I've solved time travel, and here's how. Or, you seem like a creative scholar. Would you inspect my map of all of the UFO landings over the past 2,000 years and notice that they spell out a word in Sanskrit. Okay, that kind of stuff. I and some of my other working on science or religion get these kinds of letters, and a little bit of the profile of people we can see leaking through. They tend to be well-educated, intelligent, science-informed people, or at least quantitatively informed. So engineers, accountants, other kinds of people who work with numbers, mathematicians, and so forth. They seem to be high in openness. They're willing and eager to try on new ideas. They have the conscientiousness to actually try to marshal evidence in support of these claims. They may not be off the charts because they're probably missing some things, but they sure look like they are deliberative and conscientious. And what they seem to be missing is something that doesn't quite fall into any one of the big five traits, but it's sort of somewhere in agreeableness and somewhere in conscientiousness, and that's what I'd call intellectual humility. A willingness to sort of say, yeah, but I might have this wrong, and it may be that my analysis is off base, and maybe other people haven't conspired against suppressing my discoveries. Maybe they don't like my discoveries because they're not very good. So there's sort of almost a social intelligence that's played out in this intellectual space. It seems to be a little weaker than normal. Science, the industry of doing science, the sciences has institutionalized, sort of designed to accommodate this. It recognizes, I think, I'm anthropomorphizing here, personifying, but science sort of as a whole you could read as understands that we need high conscientiousness, evidence-producing people who check and recheck, who follow the rules of good science, who make sure their tools are clean and orderly to do the good work. And we need a smattering of people high in openness that'll drive new ideas, insights, innovations, make new connections that other people missed. But we need social mechanisms to make sure that openness doesn't run amok, that it stays truth-aimed, that it stays grounded enough. And there's a real risk for scientists, even brilliant ones, that once they're outside of the mechanisms of peer review, of lab groups talking openly, honestly talking through ideas, social structures that invite disagreement in a civil way, there's a real risk that if you don't have those social dimensions of how modern science is typically performed, you get some real wingnut kinds of extremes that'll crop up and distract us from the real job at hand. And I'm sharing this in part because I think it's important, especially for those of us who go into the sciences, to remember in general, and it's important for the general public to recognize, science isn't the textbook lone scholar over on the edge revolutionary. That's not how most science goes. And if you think, oh, I'm not that kind of person, there's no place for me in science, you've misunderstood what science is about. That's one of the reasons I'm yammering on about this, even though I finished my 4-mile run. The other reason I'm yammering on is just to remind myself, because I'm no longer in the academy. I don't have an active lab group, and I'm relatively high in openness. So I come up with all kinds of ideas, and only some of them are actually good ideas. And so I have to remind myself to be appropriately subject to other people's critiques, feedback, and reluctance to go along with me without sufficient evidence. Thanks for running with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope to see you again on another run. Bye for now.